good evening, everybody. I think we should at least try to get started a little bit on time. My name is Dr. Steviano. I'm a professor here at St. John's. I run the Debate Society. And on behalf of St. John's University Debate Society, the Irish Times, and Pax Rhetorica of Carroll College in Helena, Montana, I'd like to welcome you to the first of the 2016 Irish Times Tour Debates, which will be happening across the United States over the next month or so, maybe 6 weeks or so. I don't know how long they're staying, but it's really an honor to have the Irish here to debate us, and I'm very happy you were able to come out tonight to debate us on this motion that violence is essential for social change. The debate that you're about to see is a little bit different than what you might expect. We're kind of indoctrinated to think of a debate as a particular kind of thing, a shouting match between poorly read people on CNN. That's not what is going to happen tonight, I assure you. Don't be horrified. But for those of you who watch NASCAR just for the accidents, you're going to be disappointed. That is not what we do here at St. John's. That's not what they do in international debating. And I think you're going to like it. Up here on the board behind us is this. Some of you are already participating. This is a poll that I thought we'd take on the audience's view of the motion before we have the debate. In 1922, a professor of debate named Howard Woodward decided that one of the best ways to evaluate debates was not to have professional judges do it, which is the way competitive debates often go, but to have the audience fill out what he called a shift of opinion ballot. And if you Google that, you can take a look at what Woodward came up with, and then as the social scientists got a hold of it in the 1950s, it changed a bit. But it's still kind of with us, but this is sort of the modern version of it. With your phone or your computer or tablet, I welcome you to participate in our poll and tell us how you feel about the motion tonight before the debate, and then we'll clear the result and do it again at the end. And then we'll see if the opinion of this august body has changed over the course of the night. The kind of debate that we're going to do is called British Parliamentary debate. And it's not the kind of debate that a lot of Americans are used to. Most American debate formats are what we call adversarial formats. There's a winner or a loser. There's zero-sum games. There's one side wins, one side loses. In tonight's debate, there are going to be four distinct positions represented in the debate. Two are going to be in favor of the motion, and two will be opposed to the motion. Your decision will be which team do you think moved the debate the best and most persuasive manner towards their side of the motion. That's what you're going to be evaluating. And then you can decide how you want to represent. You can see this is becoming quite heated behind me. Everyone's looking at that and not at me. I'm kind of jealous of the polling software. And I'm sure our debaters are not stacking the ballot box at all, are they? Awesome. See people with their phones on. So let's introduce the debaters tonight. And we will go, and I will introduce them in the positions that they're going to be representing tonight, and I'll kind of explain a little bit about BP debate and what you're going to see in a minute. So let's introduce our debaters. So opening government, we have Cleanna Ní Ceallacher. Is that right? Cleanna Ní Ceallacher right here. And she is a fourth-year law and philosophy student in Dublin, enjoys winning, dislikes losing, and spends an unhealthy amount of time debating. So let's welcome her. Her partner this evening in crime and debate, Ross O'Malley. And he's a would-be lawyer, has been history major, and he's always Irish. So welcome, Ross. The other team behind them representing the closing government represents St. John's University Debate Society. And it's Michaela Torres, who's a sophomore from Los Angeles, a double major in government, politics, and rhetoric, avid lover of books who hopes to save the world or die trying. And Hugh John, how do you say it?
I know you know how to say it.
Golbore. Yeah, that's the way I like to say it, but it's not the correct way to say it. He's a rhetoric and English major, aspiring to become a journalist, but is currently only a debate ball. So So these two teams are going to, and it's sort of like tennis, they'll knock arguments back and forth between the speakers, and you'll find yourself being pulled this way. They're going to represent, they're in favor of this statement. They'll be supporting the statement. They think this is true, and this we're going to try to convince you. On the opposition side, we have these four debaters, which I will introduce in the order, not necessarily the order they're speaking, but the order they'll be presenting. Aaron Vickery is a trainee lawyer, and he's loving America, even though there's a guy here yesterday. So, welcome, Aaron. And his partner tonight is from St. John's. This is the Irish-American Alliance here. Oscar Mejia is a freshman, rhetoric and legal studies major. And behind them on closing opposition, we have Taylor Tate, who is a junior philosophy and government and politics major, and she dreams to be a legislator. Our partner tonight is Tima Chappell, who's a junior biology major and French minor. Her plan is to be an actress, and her plan A is to be an actress, and her plan B is to be a doctor. So the debate tonight will take about an hour. Each person will speak for about 6 minutes. Michaela Doherty back here is going to be our timekeeper, and she's going to be doing some weird things. Don't think she's angry. She's going to be hitting the table, like things like these. These are time signals to our debaters to let them know that they are able to offer questions to the other side. So sometimes during someone's speech, you might see as many as 4 people from the other side stand up like this, or stand up holding their head, or stand up in some weird way, and they might say, "Sir, madam," on that. What they're trying to do is to get the speaker to yield the floor to them to take a point of argumentation or to take a question. And it's up to the speaker whether they take them or not. So there might be moments where all 4 stand up and they say, "No thanks," and they all have to sit down. So you'll watch for that. And then the 2 knocks mean their time is up and they should yield the floor. This kind of debate, we encourage audience participation in this format of debate. So if you hear an argument you like, audience members, you can knock for it. What do we mean by knocking? So if you hear an argument you like, it's persuading you, you think it's good, knock for it. And if you hear an argument you don't like, do the worst thing possible. Remain silent. Just think of that boring professor in that class you hate and put that face on. Allow me to demonstrate. Okay. So just do that, just remain silent. There's nothing worse if you think you're giving a killer argument and nobody responds. It's like, oh man, that's the worst. Okay. Good. Alright, so have we finished the poll? If everybody's, it looks like we kind of have a strong leaning towards the government side in the middle there. But if you haven't put it in, you've got a couple more minutes left for that. And then chairing the debate tonight will be the person who maintains order. Should these noble speakers get a little out of control, we'll maintain order. Is Anna Maria Vasile right back there, right? And she is a freshman history major from Brooklyn. So I will turn the debate over to her to run it, and at the end of the debate we will revisit this poll again. I'll turn it off for now, and then we'll come back to it when we're ready to it ends.
Six. Let's do 6.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute privilege to be here in St. John's University, and indeed in Europe, and indeed in America, and to open the case for the government. We believe, myself and Lena, that violence is essential for social progress. Because we believe that social progress is driven by ideas, and that the most powerful ideas are those that are heard above the roar of cannon fire, the chop, the guillotine, and the cries of the dying. That these are the ideas that shape nations and that shape our social progress. We have 2 principal points, and certainly I do anyway. The first is that violence is essential and always has been to the formation of nation states and indeed their continued existence. And secondly, the point that the ideas that continue to shape our society were and are shaped by violence. To move on to my first point. that no nation state has been formed without violence. Even the concept of the nation state is dependent and indeed essentially involves violence. Because as Max Weber said, that's the only way you have a state. A state is one which has legitimacy of the use of violence in its territory. And this has always been thus. Whether we go back to 1776, to your own revolution, thank you, Eric, or indeed to the French Revolution of 1789, or indeed 100 years ago this year, my own small country of Ireland had its own unsuccessful revolution, but which eventually, through violence, drove our social progress. And indeed, we see it now, we see it across the world, whereby citizens demand to be citizens, to cease being subjects. That first they're granted economic rights, secondly they demand political rights. But, well, thank you, Aaron, unless they actually take up arms, it's rarely been successfully driven any social progress, and ultimately has never succeeded in giving them that right to be citizens without actually using violence. And we believe that to be citizens, not subjects, the essentials of modern social progress requires violence. Aaron, take it now in one moment. Aaron, would you like to take a point?
Over the last 30 or 40 years, what we've seen, probably the greatest social changes we've seen are in China, where an authoritarian government on the back of massive economic success has created huge prosperity for its people and social change. What violence was involved and how legitimate was it?
Well, there was that whole revolution that China had post 1945. There was a small element of that, a small element as well of the Cultural Revolution itself as well. So violence is absolutely essential to the system of China, and indeed of actually maintaining an autocratic state that can empower the social progress of which you've correctly diagnosed. It is essential that they remain the sole legitimate use of violence within China, and that is something that they actually continue to do. So therefore, the point is null and void. But secondly, to move on to the ideas that are shaped by violence and driven by violence are the ideas that still continue to drive social progress. Whether it's the ideas of the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence wouldn't have been worth the paper that it was written on without the battles of 1776. It would have just been empty rhetoric of the like you're seeing now. Even the French Revolution, the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity were necessarily driven and supported by the acts of those who stormed the Bastille and who marched to the Vendée as well. And indeed, if we go back to World War I and World War II, that the violence and the abhorrence of such violence after these cataclysmic events have actually driven what we consider to be social progress today, particularly if you take the ideas of human rights. These came from a desire never to repeat the mistakes of the past, and they were actually rooted in that idea of a rejection of violence, but nonetheless a need for them actually to be carried out was to have organisations like the United Nations, which also has the power to carry out acts of violence in terms of peacekeeping if it wants to continue and to maintain social progress. Aaron, yes?
Could you give me an example which is not a state having the sole right to violence, or a people creating a state where you think violence will lead to social change?
Well, I think any nation state is principally self-evident, but you can't just say that if people are going to take it on. I mean, well, you can actually take the opposite, where people choose not to take up violence, and they're often, it's a case of that their goals go unfulfilled. We saw it in many countries, whether it's in Ireland in terms of the civil rights movement, ultimately they were forced to take up violence in order to actually achieve their aims, rather than saying that there's any group which, by not using violence, have fully attained otherwise. But again, it comes back to the central point of, without a nation state, we can't really guarantee the social progress which we hold so dear. There continues to be the idea that in our modern state, it's too easy, by saying that violence is not essential, or that if violence is not acceptable to drive social progress, and what we're left with is in fact just a maintenance of the status quo. And even as I said, the ideas of what shapes our social progress or our understanding thereof today. For example, without the American Revolution of 1776 and the violence that was involved in that, social progress for you today might be a cut in the tax rate on tea, which would not exactly be something that I think we could get terribly excited about. There is that idea of the quality of violence versus the quantity of violence. That violence is, by man's Hobbesian nature, something that is rooted in all of us, and fundamentally there needs to be control on that. But violence is the primary mover of social progress, whether it seeks to be the creation of a nation state, the creation of a new model of human rights and of international cooperation, as mentioned, the United Nations or the EU, both of which emerged from violence, or indeed whether it is the driver of the human rights we have. So to conclude, we believe in first prop that fundamentally social progress throughout history has been driven by violence, continues to be driven by violence, and even most recently, for example, in the Arab Spring and the democratization across the world, and that violence is an essential part of social progress. Thank you.
So we heard the Prime Minister coming in here telling us that violence have created states, have created nations. We completely agree with that, but also they like to pretend the idea that we are talking about social progress is the fact that now they're like, as my part of the talk before, like the gay movement, like the LGBT movement, and like the other movements that have happened. So they talk about like, he's really happy talking about we have created states because of violence. We have created nations because of violence and all of this like happy thoughts that he said, or they like to prevent the fact that millions of people were killed because of this idea of violence. Also, violence also creates oppression within the community itself. And I will get into this further into my speech. The process that harms violence. For example, we talk about violence damaging the community itself. And we talk about social changes that are trying to happen right now and happened in the past. We see that people are excluded between their communities because they don't respond with the same violence that the other people are responding. So now that we create, their side creates this idea of a good person within their community. So the person does not protest with the same violence. So if the person doesn't like react with the same violence and doesn't fight for the same cause at the same amount of violence, they're like put aside because you're not a good X, Y, and Z as a part of the social movement. So we believe that that is wrong in social progress. That should not happen because now you're excluding people that are harmed and that are harmed by the community that has like oppressing them. We also believe that violence creates more violence. So let's say I took your pencil and you punched me. What's going to be my reaction? Punching you back. And what's going to create a fight? So therefore, by you stating that social change is essential for violence, it will create further more violence and not this point. So it will create further more violence in itself. So we saw this in Detroit when Martin was shot. This created riots. This created destruction within the community. And we believe that social changes shouldn't be adhered to violence itself. We believe that social changes, not right now, social changes should be adhered to like peaceful protests that are like in our nations are like seen upon like good. Not like breaking upon shops and like destroying the police officers' cars or other things like that that happen in Detroit, not right now. So we believe that social changes should be based upon not violence because, as stated before, it creates more violence, it creates more oppression between the community itself, and also bringing in a third party that will like have to like calm down the situation. But we disagree.
Yeah. I would not say that your example of Detroit is a case where if the nation state is not actually punishing those responsible for carrying out acts of violence, then the community is forced to take it into its own hands. So violence is essential for stopping people from creating further acts of violence. That is part of a necessary cycle.
Then you're basically saying that the government failed to do their job. The government's job is to protect their people and be able to maintain the welfare of the people. And the government was not able to do that. Then you're appearing to more protests, to more violence, and that will create further more destruction. As I stated before, in Detroit, people were killed, police officers' cars were destroyed, shop owners' little shops were destroyed. So the whole community was negatively destroyed because of violence. Huge.
How many more people have to before they're allowed to fight back?
We don't think that people should die, because you're saying that we think violence is the best thing, and like we think that violence will create a social change. We, this side of the house, we believe that violence is part of social change, but we don't think it's essential to social change. We don't think that violence, like as you stated, we don't think that hundreds of people have to be killed. We don't believe that millions of people have to be killed, or sometimes like this whole community, like two communities that are, one community that is oppressed by the other one, creates this appearance, and it also leads to war, as like the Prime Minister talked about states being created. We also believe that the targets of all of this are like the people that are minorities, people that don't have much say in the society, which are the poor men or the poor women or the women themselves, because women are oppressed by society because of like all of these ideas that women are not like. So we believe that social change should not be led by violence, because it creates more violence. It destroys the appearance between the community. It creates more violence. It also oppresses the people within their community, because if I don't react the same violence as you do, I am not considered a good person of the community that's being oppressed. So, I talk about social progress is only created by violence. We saw in Gandhi in India how he was able to create social changes. We saw with Martin Luther King, like how he was such a peaceful person, but because he was peaceful and like there was no riots, there were no people being slaughtered. So that's why we at Sides of Position, we strongly believe that violence is not essential for social change. And for all those reasons, we're glad to
why specifically violence is necessary for any kind of social change, including the social change that they want. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the situations in which people turn to violence and why those situations are ones that can only be resolved through the use of violence. First, in response to what the Leader of Opposition told you. Firstly, he told you that this splinters community groups, because now if you're inside a community group that wants to use violence but you don't want to, you're a bad person. That's a very simplistic view of how social groups work. So for example, if you're someone within a particular identity group or a community group who does not want to use violence, there are generally non-violent groups who also try to seek social change to which you can then attach yourself. That is why there are militant feminists and there are non-militant feminists. So if you are a militant feminist, there's a group for you to chill with and hang out with. If you're not militant, then you can go somewhere else. So we don't see that splintering effect actually having any effect in the real world. Number two, though, he tells you that violence creates more violence, and therefore it's illegitimate for people who are oppressed to use violence because it creates more violence. What they're ignoring, though, is that generally the kind of violence that oppressed groups use is in response to violence that is visited upon them by state groups, for example, who consistently disenfranchise them, who, for example, will withdraw voting rights or treat them unequally, who penalise their bodies, who refuse to give them education, who refuse to give them healthcare. We think in the context of a state that aggresses against you every day of your life, you are absolutely entitled and in fact legitimate in using that same violence against them. And finally, he says that it's unfair on minorities in some way, or that they are particularly affected by the use of violence. It's not the case that minority groups don't already use violence. I mean, he gives the example, for example, of the LGBT movement. I mean, like Stonewall was a thing, right? It is the case that, like, even the smallest of minority groups have leveraged violence in order to disrupt the status quo. That's one of the reasons it's so powerful, because there don't have to be a huge number of you in order to create a lot of damage, a lot of havoc, and to disrupt the status quo in a really, really real way. Let's talk about social change. We think social change is the process by which you disrupt the social relations in a society and you change the way in which you are perceived. So whether that's the rights that the state gives you, or that the dominant majority in that state give you, whether it's just how they treat you on a day-to-day basis, or based on arbitrary boxes that they create, like whether you're a woman, or whether you're gay, or whether you're from a particular ethnicity. We think that social change is therefore something that is always always necessary for people who are oppressed. They are the most important people in this debate. Why is violence necessary in this context? Because the status quo is structurally set up to disenfranchise those people, to make sure that they can't change it from the inside. Because their ideas of peaceful protest is when you knock on the door of a parliament, and then you knock some more, and then you knock some more. They ignore violence and say that you should continue to engage in that process is one that will never work. It has been set up to never work. Notice that there are other processes in that state that will also never serve you. That's not just the law, for example, it's also like the judiciary, the legal process, again set up to structurally disenfranchise you. Notice that the media are one that are again generally run by the dominant group who have no incentive to draw attention to your struggle, because if you succeed, they will be disprivileged. That is why they structurally ignore you. That in the context of all of this, you are absolutely entitled and legitimate to use whatever means that is at your, anything that is at your, that you are able to do in order to disrupt that. I'll take you out from back up. Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about social change, are you saying like just changing a law? Like, are you saying what exactly? How are you defining?
Okay, so I'd say social change is literally anything from changing a law to entirely restructuring the way in which your society is created. So whether that's giving like voting rights to someone, or whether like the ultimate social change maybe is dismantling the state. Who knows? That would also be social change. It's a very broad debate. Okay, let's talk about when it is that people turn to violence. No, thank you, I'll take it in a second. Why it's so important that people are able to have that at their disposal. So the thing is, people don't choose to turn to violence when a letter-writing campaign would succeed. People don't choose to put their bodies on the line, their lives and their safety, when they can engage in a peaceful process and achieve the same ends. People don't go on hunger strike when they could call their senator and sort the problem out there. People only engage in these kind of tactics when the other means at their disposal absolutely do not work. And we've given you reasons why they do not work. No, wait 15 seconds and I'll take you then. Here's the issue, right? At the point at which they say that those processes are sufficient, they ignore the problem. Because those processes have been set up in a way that absolutely requires you to turn to violence in order to create this problem quickly.
History is littered with people who choose the easy option of violence. Donald Trump, if he's elected, will do that. He hasn't been left it as a last resort. He'll do it anyway.
Okay, so I don't think violence is the easy option. I don't think going out into the street and risking your life and your safety by turning on the police, for example, in burning down police cars and in allowing yourself to be exposed to that kind of violence is the easy option. He throws you red herring when he says that Donald Trump will engage in violence. We don't have to stand over all violence. We stand over the violence that is trying to achieve social change. Donald Trump, notice, does not want to achieve social change, given that the status quo is something that benefits him materially. So that's irrelevant. What do we tell you, though, is most important in this debate? The people that matter in this debate are the ones who only have violence at their disposal. Those are people who are absolutely entitled to use that violence. They are people for whom the state has continually failed and will continue to fail unless we give them this option, unless they take it. We're incredibly hard to oppose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. We now call upon the Deputy Opposition.
It's very nice to stand up and say, when you're brutalised, pick out someone oppressed and say, shouldn't they be able to resort to violence? It's only legitimate, however, we believe, if that violence doesn't harm other people and your own social movement disproportionately, okay? And it's only legitimate, okay, where that violence is actually going to help you, okay? What we say is, they've referenced social change like the marriage equality movement or the gay rights movement generally. That, despite their red herring of like Stonewall and stuff, that was a thing, wasn't it? It was a thing. But what was the real thing that brought about substantive rights for gay people in this community and in other communities? It was the humanisation of those gay people, the widespread acceptance of them in their society. Violence tends to happen. They're talking about movements who tend to be minority, who tend to be powerless, who tend to be otherised. What they're suggesting through violence is a mechanism that we know always otherises, necessarily involves the otherization of another person, because in order to legitimize violence, you actually have to go through against what many people believe is your human inclination to treat them as another human being, okay? If you do that, you legitimize other people's violence against you, and you legitimize the idea that you are different fundamentally to them. That is what would be most harmful to a movement like the gay rights movement. And unfortunately for these guys, they don't get to say, look, in some situations, violence is necessary. They have to say it's essential for social change. And I'm going to tell you today that the social change involved, widespread social change in terms of the civil rights movement, but particularly with regards to gay rights, proves that it was not about violence. It wasn't people who were brutally oppressed and who many people would say could legitimately respond to violence. It was those who sought to build bridges. It was those who sought to make different connections between different oppressed people and to humanize gay people from various different backgrounds consistently over 50, 100 years. It was those people who brought us to a position of equality, not the people at Stonewall, even though many people can see it as legitimate. It was not essential to their movement to achieve it. Okay, in particular, I'm going to deal with why for minority social groups it's illegitimate for them to go to violence. It was largely undermined my partner's point about fracture within these social groups. So she said often there will be people who are in favour of violence, and often there will be people who are more extreme, who are less extreme and who are in favour of more peaceful options. The problem for them is that everyone remembers Stonewall, even though it was just a tiny, relatively small incident, because of the symbolism of violence. For those who are against you, who want to paint you as violent, like people like Donald Trump do, but like powerful individuals who undermine your humanity, will often pick these minor elements of your movement and use them to undermine all the good work that those who have taken those blows within your communities and tried to build a better tomorrow, that those people, their sacrifices will be undermined by the ability to just tarnish you because you did something that most people see as illegitimate. In Detroit, with the examples that were completely ignored on this side that was brought up, okay? Those riots painted a movement and a community as violent that was about peace. They undermined the community leaders who tried to say that this was about hope instead of violence. They undermined those community leaders who said that this was about people acting humanely together rather than the otherization and undermining of those around them. And the idea that violence, whether it's by a policeman or another citizen, can never be legitimate because of our basic humanity. That's what you undermine when you go to violence, and that's something that can never be undermined if we want the type of social change that we want. Because they talked a lot about, violence was necessary to create, the state, and we're very happy with the safe idea of the state having, the exclusive role of violence. Those states and those violence, the violence that was involved with it, was probably illegitimate. There was probably safer ways to create the countries that were created. It's particularly when you look at post-colonial countries, but even if you look at Ireland, there was peaceful methods that were ignored instead of violence, okay? And what they have to stand up and support is that violence that undermined those peaceful methods. Yes, sir.
Do you not agree that violence shocks people into action, and that all the examples you gave, whether it's Stonewall, whether it's the Civil Rights Movement, whether it's Detroit, that the violence was necessary to shock people into engaging in social progress?
It is shocking, okay, when violence is used. But in general, it's not as shocking for individuals who are on the fence or likely to support your movement. And if you're in a community where a huge percentage of the population, okay, don't see you as as acting properly by being gay or things like that, it doesn't convince you. In fact, what it does is it takes the people you most want to access, the people who are already against you, and it paints you as a negative actor, a threat to themselves, and all human beings react negatively to violence, and all human beings react negatively to threats against themselves. Okay? And it also undermines you in various different ways, such as if you are a member, okay, of the gay community. okay? What stonewalled in and what those sort of violent acts do, okay, is it means that if you're not someone who's willing to go to that, you are not a proper gay warrior. This element of your identity is not something you're willing to protect as much as other people, and it isolates those who want to fight on different battlegrounds, like a race or a class, and it shoves them out because you have to shoot some of those people. Thank you.
The Deputy Lead Opposition for Speech, now called upon the Member of Government.
Speaker, audience, please do not be swayed by Aaron's charming accent and loud speaking. What we are here to tell you today is that at some point in history, for social change to have happened, there has had to have been violence. There has had to have been someone who was oppressed, there has had to have been someone who was hurt, and there has had to have been someone who was killed. Whether you take the action that opening government wants you to take and using violence to garner social change, or take the action that opening opposition wants you to take and advocate peacefully, the root cause of both of these is violence. So what we are here to tell you today is firstly, is that these marginalized groups are invisible. These people want visibility, and this is the only way that they are able to gain social change, is if people can see them. So when these people are seen as invisible, what makes them visible? And that is the violence that is acted upon them. Because when nobody sees you and nobody knows that you are being hurt, how can people help you? How can you advocate for yourself and for the rights that you are born with? So what we think is that with the violent acts that are not depicted, but placed upon you, I guess, that are placed upon you, we think that what this does is gives you visibility. It gives you the ability to, like I said before, take the violent route, which is legitimate, even though they say that it's not. Because what it does is it shows people that you are sick of the crap that you are being put through. It shows that you are frustrated with your government. It shows that you are tired of being hurt. It shows that you want change. And what you do is you then act upon the government, which you are able to do. So we feel that when you take the violent route, which is legitimate, it shows other people who might be harmed that you can advocate for your rights. It shows that you are no longer going to be oppressed. It shows that you don't want the status quo, and what it does is shows that, and most importantly, it's that the violence that you are using has purpose. What they like to depict the violence on our side of the house as is just you running into the street and burning cop cars and shooting police. No rational person does this. This will happen on both sides of the house, whether or not you're trying to gain social change or not. But the violence that we are talking about on our side of the house is specifically the violence used to act against the government, showing that you are not going to put up with the crap that you have been putting up with for centuries and centuries and centuries. So now let's move into more about the violence as the root cause of both forms of advocacy. So you take one step on, if we take a look at this side of the house and we see people who are hurt, we see people who are being marginalized, we see them being killed in the street, and then you take a step onto this side of the house, you see people who are being hurt, you see people who are marginalized, you see people who are being killed on the street. What you see is both root causes of these advocacies are the same. It's just the root cause is violence. The violence is necessary because what it does is it sparks you and inspires you to want to change. It inspires you to want to act against the government, and it inspires you to want to advocate for your rights. Yeah.
I think I get what you're saying, but some disagreements or structural inequalities happen without violence. And so if you take, for example, the gay rights movement where...
No. The gay rights movement, there have been many people who have been killed just because they were gay, just because they were transgender, and just because of their sexual orientation. For you to come up here and say that there have been times in which they were just maybe not being able to hire, I understand that does happen, but what sparks this movement is the fact that when they are being killed in the street, when they are being kicked out of their houses, when they are being harassed in homeless shelters, this type of violence that is being acted against them, this is what garners the support. This is what shows people these people actually need help. This shows why we need to help them, and this is why we need to actually do something about it. Now, when we take
Yeah, so like now, when you take a look at the violent approach, is that, yes, I understand that not every single time you're going to be able to like run into the street, guns blazing, and like defeat your enemies, no thank you. But what we do understand, I hopefully think that you do, is that by the root cause, stop it Oscar, the root cause of the violence, the root cause of both forms of advocacy is violence, in that people are being hurt, people are not seen, and then what the violence does, it shows them, it legitimizes their actions, and what it does is it shows that they need help. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Governor, for the speech. Now call upon the leader of opposition. Okay, so let's look at like the examples that they gave, and just like a few other examples. Like let's look at the Arab Springs, the Civil Rights Movement, the gay movement, right? Okay, so I feel like in all of these situations, or just these situations in Latin America and Africa, and all with like the Ogoji, I can't really pronounce like the people in like Nigeria, in all of these examples that I'm like that we have all listed, and then the examples that I'm giving you, like we think that like their social change that they say that they got isn't necessarily really social change. What happened with these examples that they're giving you is what I see is that gay people or people of the LGBT community, people who have fought for civil rights, they are still dependent in our society. The administrators, public and private administrators who enforce rules still have created a system where these marginalized groups have to comply. They're still in a situation where like their basic liberal rights to privacy, rights to respect, rights to individual voice, they're still being rendered invisible, as Hugh John told you. So we think that this sort of like social change that they're saying that we like magically are getting when we have violence doesn't necessarily mean isn't necessarily happening. We can't eliminate structural oppression, which is what we're all talking about today. We're talking about structural oppression. We can't eliminate that when we just get rid of laws, or when we just topple dictators, or when we or things like that. In order to actually get social change, we need to revolutionize the economic, political, and cultural institutions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely understand that, but in my speech I already explained that the root cause of both your side and our side is the fact that violence has happened at some point in history. Please engage with that.
Okay. Okay, that doesn't mean, because first of all, let's talk about like history. No, actually, no, I will. Okay. Okay, in history, I just see, and the history books that I've read, is a whole bunch of rich white men and black men, all people, we're just men in general, just wealthy men, basically fighting over land and resources and things, and they're not like distributing it out to people. There's still people at the top in feudalism and like whatever system you, even like some issues of like democracy and all those other things. Like we have people at the top, and there's people at the bottom, and there's still this sort of like systematic oppression. There's still people at the bottom who are being rendered invisible, like we told you. There are still people who are the experience of how like the dominant meanings of society. Okay, yeah, there's still a situation where because of the universalization of the dominant group's experience in culture is established as the norm, because of that, these people are still victims of this sort of like cultural imperialism, where because of how they're viewed in society, they can never socially or economically mobilize. We think that that system is still in place. So we think that when you have some sort of like violence, the only thing that happens is that, what's really just going to happen is that certain laws are going to continue to ensure oppression, because you're not really toppling, you're not really having some sort of like revolutionizing, you're not really revolutionizing the system. Go ahead.
So is change more likely with violence or without?
Okay, so this is what I think is super, super weird. I think that they're like they're associating correlation with causation. So just because in a lot of situations where we've gotten social change, there have been situations where maybe there have been some alterations. Because I think that that's what they're arguing for. They're arguing for like alterations in the system. They're not actually advocating for social change. So there have been situations where maybe there were small alterations. Okay, so what happens then? Because like I said, there's still alterations. They're not actually we're not actually getting like social change. We think that what happens is that we blame the blame is being shifted from the victims to the attackers. The marginalized groups are still marginalized, even if it's a situation where like the marginalized group may be able to use violence to be leaders. They're still going to, and I feel like most of the situations where that happens is they use their power to stay in power and they don't change the system. So it's still basically you're just replacing some authoritative people or corrupt people and replacing with other people. So it'll be a situation where maybe the state, if it does get changed, it'll lead to a vacuum, or there'll be tensions between extreme groups, or there'll be a situation where the violence doesn't lead to the actual social change that the will of the people want. So in any of those situations that I'm saying, because you're not actually getting change, these social groups have these sort of fake autonomy, this fake agency, but agency is going to be put on them because it looks like, oh, well, you got this one law, or you got this person to topple a dictator. So people are saying so why does racism still exist if we have the civil rights movement, if you march, you did all of these other things? Why is it a situation where in the Arab Springs, where Egypt and Saudi Arabia and all these people are still victims? Maybe it's the people or the problem and not necessarily something else. So thank you.
Thank you for opposition for speech, and now call on Government Whip.
Think that violence is always necessary when the violence that we're talking about and the mechanisms that are employed are always in use to fight an evil greater than itself. And we think that's what this debate comes down to today. How do we fight the greater evils in society? So what is it that we hear from their side of the house? We hear instances of movements and we hear instances of situations in which people have utilized the mechanisms available to them within the system to advocate for social change. But we think that what up and down the bench has failed to recognize is this is not what we're talking about on our side of the house. On our side of the house, what we are advocating for are the minorities and the individuals in the groups that have been ostracized and otherized and pushed so far into the outskirts of society that the system in which they're talking about and functioning in is something that is so other that it will never work. So what we're going to talk to you today about is how do we best achieve the successful society that we think both sides of the house are advocating. So what Hugh John and I talked to you about today, or what Hugh John talked to you about in his speech, is how do we get these best societies? Well, we think that we get these best societies through this idea of consent. So we think that the government derives its power from the masses. So the way that the government derives its legitimacy is through the idea that all of us can enact social change and the government will then listen. But we think that what happens in the situations that we're talking about is this isn't necessarily the case. So we think that the people who we're talking about, the people that are driven to violence, are people who have constantly advocated within the system, who have constantly, like opening government said, knocked on the door of Parliament, but who have been ignored. Why? Because we think that the people we're talking about are people who have had every other avenue of political change close to them. Yes?
Okay, so in a large amount of cases where there are still various different options available, okay, to people, that other avenues, it's very hard to say that every other avenue has been knocked out. In those situations, social change does happen and violence isn't essential.
So we think that what they also fail to neglect on their side of the house is they talk about the instances which these avenues are available. But we think that the only way that these avenues came to be is through violence at some point in time. So we think that the only way that the LGBTQ movement has a platform to advocate for themselves is because 100 years ago, men died for the right to protest, or people died for the right to advocate for themselves, or for the freedom of speech, or for the right to have a vote that enacts legislation through these political avenues. But we think that we never get to this point in society without somebody who has died prior, or without violence that has been enacted to create the platform that the side of the house seems to think is available to everybody know. So this is what we're talking to you about today, right? How do we best enact this change? So we're telling you that the instance in which this violence has been employed is instance in which diplomacy has been exhausted in every other way. So we think that now what we're left with is violence as the only mechanism to advocate for political change. Because we think what they see on their side of the house is violence as the end goal. But this isn't what we're telling you. We think that violence is instead used as a tool, as a mechanism for communication to advocate for something greater. Because we think that what we're talking about today is essentially movements. So we think this is what violence provides us. It provides visibility. Because we think, like we said, these people have been pushed, these groups have been pushed so far to the outskirts of society that they inherently become invisible, not only to the masses, but to the government that they're trying to create change for or from. So we think that violence is a mechanism of communication because it brings attention to this movement. Because why? Because we're operating outside of the system. Because violence is scary and violence is shocking, and it's scary to think that someone is advocating for something so important that they're putting their life on the line. But what this does is it puts it on the news and it puts it in newspapers. And what this does is it then provides legitimacy, which is important to any movement. No. Why? Because what happens when violence is outwardly employed? We think it demands a reaction because we think violence is so shocking that it's an obligatory reaction. There has to be some sort. So what this does is it essentially says that these actors are unique insofar as A, we've ignored them for so long, but B, now that we can't. Why? Because they've employed some sort of mechanism that we are forced to respond to. We think what this essentially does is it says, we've ignored you for so long, now we can't. Your movement has some sort of legitimacy, we have to pay attention to you back us.
In general, if the state is like promoting this sort of oppression, then it's not going to be like favorable towards the like marginalized group.
So we think this is what we hear from closing gov, right? The state is employing X, Y, and Z. But we think that what they inherently fail to neglect or neglect to realize is the problem is with the state itself. Because this is what we hear from closing government, right? We hear that, well, we understand that the objective is social change, but we're talking about the structure. And we think that you need to operate in the structure. So we hear this from closing government when he said, well, maybe they should legislate, or maybe there needs to be economic reforms. But we think that what we said time and time again, up and down the government bench, is that there is no opportunity for legislation. We think that there is no opportunity for mobilization through a vote. We think that there is no opportunity to do some sort of economic reform. Rather, because we think the system in itself is inherently what is flawed, these individuals and movements are forced to operate outside of the system. Because why? This superstructure that you're talking about is not working for them. Because it's been created to push you to the outside. Therefore, the only way to enact change within the system you're forced to live in is through means that are not available to you. So in every instance that this means violence, we on the government bench advocate for yes. Why? Because we think that in every instance, violence is always going to be necessary because what it's employed to do is fight an evil greater than itself and greater than what the opposition bench paints it to be.
Thank you, Governor, for your speech. Now call upon the opposition group to participate.
So basically, what we're hearing from the government side is that there never will be any opportunity for us to gain our rights or to gain social change without using violence. This is not true. Because we've seen this. We've seen this like we argued earlier with the gay rights movement. We've seen this with the civil rights movement. And we've seen how using violence has made different movements illegitimate. Let's take Black Lives Matter for an example. You have this movement start. Itself, online, is a non-violent movement. You have a small fraction of people that riot in the name of Black Lives Matters. This is the media coverage that you want, that closing government argues for. You want the media, instead of showing the non-violent protesters that put their hearts and souls into this, you want the media to show the rioters. You want the media to call us up. You want the media to say all the bad things about us because that works. No. That takes away your legitimacy. You lose your agency. You use your ability to fight for things when you turn and say, let's show how big our guns are. Let's set things on fire to get what we want. That doesn't work. And that's what we're trying to tell you. You have this argument that violence is always essential because history has shown us that violence has made things work for us. Yeah, okay. History has shown us that people have used violence, but history has shown us a lot of things. People have done a lot of things that aren't right. People have done genocides to get things that they wanted. What are we going to do? Do genocides against straight people so gay people can have rights? I'm sorry, but your argument does not work. It does not work. I'm not going to turn to violence because I don't feel like my voice is not being heard. I'm going to use my best weapon, which is my speech, or my writing, or turning to my brothers and sisters and uniting. Regardless of how hard we're going to fight, because that's what my ancestors did, and that's what history has shown worked for them. You had people come out in the civil rights movement, and they stood, how about this? They argue that nonviolence is invisible. Someone please tell me that Rosa Parks was invisible. Somebody please tell me that you did not see her sit down. She sat down. She did not utter one word. She sat there. They dragged her off that bus, and she is the reason why we began social change. Now, I'm sorry. I just don't believe that the violence that you want, that you hunger for, and that you argue for works. I'm not an invisible person, and I know that the best thing that has worked for our people and that has created solidarity that works long-term is peace. And that's what our greatest civil rights leaders have taught us. Yeah,
Was it not, as you mentioned, that Rosa Parks was dragged off the bus? That those who marched on the Columbia, they were
dragged off the bus. People were dragged through the streets as they striked and they protest. But you know what? They got up quietly. And they stood there, and they took it. You look at these movements, crossing the bridge going to Birmingham, trying to cause these changes. I sat there, they sat there in silence. And their voices were heard the loudest. And the people that were shadowed the most were the people that used violence. Because you know what, that media that you guys want to use violence, the media that you guys want to see the violence, that's working against them. Because during the civil rights movement, when people saw the violence that was used against those peaceful protesters and those dogs and those water hoses, what they saw was a reason to come behind these people and work for peace in the long run.
Was it not the violence that was used against these people that garnered the emotional support for these movements?
Okay, so we get it. Violence causes problems. Violence causes problems. Yes, we get it. That's right. Congratulations, you win. It might cause a problem, but it's not the solution. What? I'm sorry. I'm not going to sit here and have a debate about what causes problems. We get it. Problems get caused when people get hit. Problems get caused when people get killed. Nobody's saying that you're wrong. Let's move on from that because we're saying that what we're looking for is a solution. I'm looking for a solution to that problem. I'm looking for a long-term solution to that problem. So when I have these people coming at me telling me that violence is what works, so let's look at Arab Spring and let's take out these dictators and create a power vacuum and get another dictator in because the movement that you worked with was based in violence and the people that you followed were based in violence. So the movement that you worked to remove, you might have removed a violent one, but you just put in another one because violence isn't working for you. What has shown is that when people come together in solidarity for peace, this is when we get a movement that stands. A movement that stands for something, a movement that unifies and inspires people, and that's what we want. I don't want women and children to look on the TV and be looking at people killing each other, or hitting each other, or rioting, and think that's what you have to do to get your way? What, so I'm going to fight my mom because I don't want to clean my room? No, let's move on from that. Let's set good examples for our society. We get it. History has shown that violence is what you used before. But history is probably the greatest thing to teach our lessons and learn our lessons from. It doesn't always work. Let's look at the good examples. Yeah, LGBTQ, that's one of the best. You have marriage equality come from people working together and letter writing campaigns and doing things that are taught from them to be just mediocre and not okay. But look, it worked. The legislation changed. The people stood behind them. Solidarity was created. And it was peaceful. And that's what we argue for. Thank you.
We thank all of the debaters for their speeches, and now ask them to cross out and shake hands.
So let's thank all the speakers. One last time. All right, so that is what, for the most part, British parliamentary debate looks like. It's the kind of debate we do here in St. John's. So if you'd like to be a part of it, you're more than welcome to join our club and practice doing this. They all started from, well, I can't speak for the Irish, maybe they were always good, but I know the St. John's students were not always this good, and they got better with practice. That's all it really takes. So I'm going to put the poll back up in a minute, but I guess what we'll do is open the floor for you as the audience member to make comments about the debate or ask questions of the debaters, or anything you want. It's pretty much, for the most part, open, what you'd like to ask about. So, Dr. Kashish.
This was wonderful. Congratulations to all of you. I was wondering how come you did not mention, say, Gandhi and what he did as a peaceful movement in trying to create this or fight against violence. Yeah, and I was just thinking, I was waiting to hear for that.
I think the reason I didn't use it was I thought the gay rights movement was more relevant and more current. I was trying to make it so that their arguments slowly, I was trying to make it so that they might seem more dated. I think the Gandhi thing is a little difficult standing on because they were shot down so much that you might be able to comprehensively say they probably did have a right to react differently, and in the India example, the partition that happened afterwards, even after the peaceful movement, maybe if they were willing to go to violence, maybe something better could have been achieved.
All right. Next, any other question? Comment? Question?
Well, I have a comment. Tama, I was so excited that you used the Black Lives Matter movement because I thought a lot of the things that you see, the violence, and it doesn't really portray what the movement's actually about. I thought that was a really good example to use for your side. I was waiting for it to happen. I was just so happy you brought it up.
People are still thinking about, oh, oops. Okay. People still thinking about the poll. You can go ahead and send your poll results in if I feel now. Other questions or thoughts about the debate, or questions about debate in general, or I think you can even ask questions about what Ireland is like. I think.
We're all ready for that, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Anything at all? Yeah.
I guess, do you guys really agree with your side, or do you just thought it would be an interesting debate?
For both sides. We got randomly assigned. I think the answer, as in most debates, is it completely depends. I think in debating you kind of have to go really hard with the side that you selected, and I think in real life, it is absolutely never the case that one side is completely right. So I think that's a downfall, but it's good to pretend like you care loads about the side now.
Anyone else want to respond to that? Yeah, in debate, you're randomly assigned your position. So oftentimes you don't even know what the topic is before you get your position.
So I actually used to agree with the side that I'm on now, but in preparation, because I knew we would be randomly assigned, I still
started doing research for that side, and I was just like completely persuaded. So like then today I'm just like, damn, like I have to argue about this and I don't believe it. But like I still think like the arguments are legitimate, and it, like she said, it all depends on the situation.
Yes, it's one of those strange things. We think of debate in our society as the place where you go after you've figured it out and you have all the facts, and you go and try to convince the audience that you're right. But what if we were to reconsider debate as a place where you would like try to figure out your position? Sort of like writing a paper. We often think of writing a paper as like I get all my facts, I figure out where I am, and then I write the paper. It's like the final result. But what if writing the paper was the starting place for figuring out what you know or what you believe or where you are? How would that change things? Think about the debates we see on the Fox News and CNN and stuff like that. How would you if that was the place where we had to figure out what we stood for, instead of the candidates coming and saying, well, here's what I believe, here's the truth of the matter, like as an ending point, it changes things. So, I'll stream it.
Yeah, I just think that like in debate we have to put our what we believe in aside and taking the position that we're given, because in certain debates we get motions or like sides that we strongly disagree with, and it goes against the morals. So we have to set that aside and actually take upon the position that we're given. And I think that's like what all of us do. So if we do agree with the motion, sometimes we don't, and that then going backwards.
Yeah, I think it's kind of forced me to reevaluate on the things that I decided I believed. And then I was like going, oh, I really, really strongly believe this thing, and then getting emotion about the opposite and being like, why is it that I actually believe the thing I believe now that I can argue against it? So I think it's really good for that. Or sometimes you're like, oh yeah, no, I am absolutely correct to believe the thing that I believe. But now you've reasons for it. So.
Anybody else?
They'll give you extra credit.
So this tour is an annual thing the Irish Times newspaper sponsors, and these Irish debaters had to go through quite a bit to get here. How many debates did you guys have to do to get to the position where you thought, I actually might be able to go to the events?
I think there were 4 rounds.
Yeah, so there are 4 rounds in this competition, but like all of us have not very illustrious debating careers, but like years of times where we debated before. So it was rough, but it was worth it.
There's like 150 teams enter nationally, so from any university or third level institution in Ireland, everyone competes. The first round is an absolute bloodbath. 8 teams are in, only 2 go through to the next round, and then it's like 2 from everything, and then you have a semi-final, and only 1 team and 1 individual go through the final. So it's kind of it's like playoffs in anything. Like it's kind of very much a cup mentality, but it's great.
It's just like sport. Just as cool.
Yeah, in the back.
I just wanted to say, like I was leaning a lot towards their side, but then the last, sorry,
Tama.
when she spoke, it kind of made me sort of think, just like toward the side a little bit, but like your argument was really good because you're so passionate about it, so I feel like it made me feel kind of what you were feeling, so it made me lean more towards your side. But I used to do mock trial in high school, which is kind of the same as this, so it was like exciting to kind of feel it again, like, and everybody was so passionate about it.
A little nostalgia. You should come experience it in the debate club.
I mean, I was more of a background person. Like, I would stand up and, like, stop people from talking. I didn't really speak up there, though, so.
Well, that's okay. That's valuable. We'll take it. Did I see a hand up?
Yeah, what I was going to say, what I think was so well done on your part, was that you actually, I think you addressed really well what they were trying to say, and you agreed with, like, yes, violence does play a role, but I think what was so successful is the fact that you said, though violence can be essential, you were saying that peace is essential for positive social change, which I think is a really good distinction, because everyone's just talking about social change in general, but you're talking about a positive, long-lasting solution, which I think helped your side.
It's also the thing as well, even I kind of like looking at this side, history teaches you a lot about what happened, but you're kind of focusing on what could happen, the possibilities of peace as opposed to just saying, because it happened, this is what we're banned, but you know,
Yeah, very good observation. Yes?
If you ever
So like, you can agree with the opposing side to sort of like downplay their argument. So like, I can't think of an example like off the top. All right, so like earlier I said that.
Yeah, I saw that one time on YouTube. Okay, that side, but still.
Yeah, so like, what we said earlier was that both are like mechanisms to create change, but like violence is the root cause. So like, we agree that you can use peaceful protesting and like non-violence to create change, but that's not the only way. And like, the only way you can't do that is if violence occurred in the past. So like, you can use it to sort of like flip it on them or say that they're not really disagreeing with your side, so you should pay more attention to us.
Anybody else? Going once? Okay, well, thanks again for everybody who spoke. Thank you guys. I think we're sort of split. It seems like. If we compare it to you want to see the earlier one? Oh gosh, why? Anyway, this is where we were. The last one, I think it was like, oh, here it is. So this is what it was at the beginning of the debate. 39%, but much more towards the middle. And then, now we're kind of almost split now. Like nobody was in the middle anymore. So maybe debate kind of cleaves people away from uncertainty towards more certainty. We didn't have very fine distinction. We can make even more fine distinctions, I think, in the poll and find even more interesting stuff. So I don't know what that means who won, but I guess it would be the government side or favor side. A little bit, but still pretty close. Anyway, thanks for coming, and